The meta-defining Kjar weapons from ATKT are finally available on PC, and we know you want them. Consistent P1s are by far the fastest way to farm them, and if you haven't seen it already, we do have a guide on how to do those, link in the top right and the description. But what are the best possible builds you want to use to break ATKT's horns? Well, I'm JinJinx.
And I'm Tuna. And we're
the Monster Hunter Math Guys. And this is Arch Tempered Kulve Taroth Meta Builds, Part 2, Horn Breaking Builds.
Welcome to Part 2 of our ATKT P1 sets. In this video, we'll cover the Area 4 Naked KT sets. If you're looking for the Area 1 through 3 sets, check the link at the top right. 2 sets are considered mandatory since their hit zone values shift for Area 4. Part Breaker is also useless in Area 4, providing no benefit to the horn break. The timing is so tight for a proper P1 that it's important to have the best possible sets. Similar to the Mantle Shredding sets, you do need Bombardier 3 on your Area 4 sets. After the horn chip, P1 ATKT still has around 50,000 in horn HP. We go for quad bombing on the wake up with our P1 squad, so a 30% damage boost is a lot of free damage. We'll include a higher EFR affinity booster set for each of our non-CC sets. Since KT shouldn't be moving during the CC chain, it's easy to take advantage of this extra affinity. Now, assuming that you fail to break the horns during CC, the affinity booster sets will do less damage while freestyling. Using these sets, it may be possible to bypass the freestyling stage entirely, so we'll give you the choice on which you prefer. Both P1 well. This is all assuming that you're doing a CC chain, which is the only way to consistently get P1s. Unless you're really good at freestyling, in which case, you don't really need this video.
In which case, just throw on your best set and unga her bungas until she falls down. Alright, before we get into the builds, let's talk team composition. Compared to old KT, ATKT has even more horn health and less time before she leaves an Area 4, making everything much tighter. This means designing your team composition in order to maximize the damage you can deal to her in the small window of time you have is extremely important to your success. For old KT, your standard team composition was 1 CC hunter and 3 DPS hunters. However, this only worked because 1 hunter was capable of doing all the CC you needed to break KT's horns consistently. This is no longer the case. ATKT CC thresholds for sleep and para have gone up significantly. So much so that you can't even reliably get a second sleep or para on her even with multiple CC hunters. The second sleep on her takes over 40 sleep 2 ammo. So yeah, that's not gonna happen. This means we now have a third category in the Area 4 composition, the Mounter. Getting at least 1 mount is now imperative to consistently P1ing ATKT. It helps provide the extra CC your team needs to succeed that you can no longer get out of the second sleep or para. Of course, pod KOs still remain an option, but they are very inconsistent to say the least. We have had several runs that have timed out before while we were waiting for a pod KOable attack to come. It seems like Capcom just decided to reduce the frequency of those to make the difficulty higher.
Let's cover the mounting category first. For mounters, the best options are Switch Axe, Greatsword, and Sword and Shield. All 3 of these have the ability to mount ATKT in 2 hits or less, while dealing very high DPS. Let's start with my favorite, Sword and Shield. For Sword and Shield, you have 2 different options, the Joe SNS and the Kjar Ice SNS. Joe is the easiest weapon to get out of the 2, since you can craft it. Joe has higher Raw, which means you deal more damage on Falling Bash and Helm Splitter. This affinity booster set hits 580.27 EFR. That's only with affinity booster and peak active. Health augment's needed because you have peak in the build, and a damage augment will lead to the highest EFR while under the effects of affinity booster. If you expect to do some freestyling, take an affinity and health augment instead to help with non-boosted damage. Handicraft 3 is needed since your job is to mount, and you won't get affinity booster for Helm Splitter.
There is also a non-affinity booster version of the build if you are expecting your runs to be a bit sloppier and you'll have to freestyle more. But we will cover that in a bit because it is the same build that is used for the Devil Joe weapons template for DPS weapons. Next up is the Kjar Stream SNS. So SNS has always been a very interesting weapon to me because it's the only weapon type where both raw as well as elemental styles are both very meta. They are strong in different matchups and they accomplish this due to the fact that they have different playstyles for raw versus elemental. Other weapons of course have situations where elemental weapons will deal more damage, but the playstyle remains the same. The only real difference is your numbers get higher. So the Stream SNS does do slightly more DPS compared to the Devil Joe SNS. However, it accomplishes this by doing a different combo than the Joe SNS. The Joe SNS basically loops the Falling Bash combination on KT's head when she is down. This move applies very little elemental hits per second but has a very high motion value per second, so it favors high raw weapons like the Devil Joe SNS. Conversely, the Stream SNS uses the Slash combo. This is the elemental SNS combo that favors a bit more raw compared to element per second. The combo is a lateral slash, return stroke, round slash, spiral slash, and then thrust. You basically just loop that over and over. Translating that to a PS4 layout, because that's what I'm familiar with, that's basically neutral circle, 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 direction, triangle, triangle, repeat. These different combos all have different motion value per second and elemental hits per second, which makes the combo damage for each SNS against each matchup pretty unique, which makes the math for SNS very deep. This is actually part of the reason why this video took a while to come out, and thank you for your patience on it coming out. So if we compare the non-affinity booster builds, the Ice SNS has a DPS of 179.55, while the Joe SNS using the Falling Bash combo instead has a DPS of 170.57. For affinity booster versions, the Ice SNS is 190.07 DPS and the Joe SNS is 187.60. Now the Joe SNS will do a little bit more damage during the Helm Splitters, but overall the Ice SNS will deal more damage. So the Ice SNS build looks like this if you run affinity booster. For all intents and purposes, Agitator basically has 100% uptime against ATKT. Our standard method for ATKT Area 4 is to sleep her, bomb her, then she wakes up and she's enraged. At that point, pretty much all the meaningful damage you will deal against her will be when she's in this enraged state. Flinch free is mandatory because the slash combo on SNS does not give you any super armor, so your teammates will be flinching you while you're trying to hit her. Falling Bash does give you super armor while the combo is active, so the Joe SNS can get away with not running flinch free. The non-affinity booster version of the build basically runs weakness exploit instead of peak performance, otherwise the rest of the skills are the same. This does reduce your raw, which does affect your DPS output. Realistically, you're probably better off using affinity booster if you're with a group you know how to run with. P1s get messy and inconsistent if you start freestyling because you didn't break the horns during CC, so it's best to try to maximize your damage during the CC. Also, even though the DPS gains compared to the Joe SNS aren't that significant on the Stream SNS, freestyling is its big strength compared to it. Raw SNS only really beats Elemental SNS, especially against ATKT when it's using either Helm Splitter or Falling Bash. But when you are freestyling KT, you can't really use either of those super well. When she's running about all willy-nilly, you're pretty much best off just trying to fit in tiny combos on the horns whenever you can. Ice SNS excels at this. Alright, let's talk about Greatsword, and let's cover the Affinity Booster build first. So Greatsword does actually apply more mounting damage per hit than any of the other options here. But the reason we picked Greatsword, Switch Axe, and SNS as our top picks for the mounting weapon is because they still all only take 2 hits to mount for the first time anyway. So at least for the first mount, they all realistically take the same amount of time to mount. Now GS does get to use a wake up attack, which can be pretty nice on that one sleep you get, but realistically it also means that they're going to miss out on the bombing strats and ultimately isn't worth doing. Not to mention all the time you spend setting up a TCS wake up is time you don't get later on. This means that if you do fail to break the horns during the CC chain, then during the freestyle phase you have 10 less seconds to get that mount off that may be the difference between the P1 or not.
Although this set has 53% affinity, it hits 100% with Affinity Booster, reaching a total of 604.3 EFR. If you trust your CC, you can again swap Health Boost for Damage Augment, reaching 615.38 EFR. Here's the non-affinity booster set. The EFR is a little bit lower at 570.11, but doesn't need Affinity Booster. Better for freestyling.
Alright, finally for mounting options, let's talk my favorite, Switch Axe. So similar to SNS here, you have 2 options, the Kya Stream Switch Axe versus the Joe Switch Axe. Compared to SNS, the competition is a little bit tighter. They almost do the exact same amount of damage. The primary advantage that the Stream Switch Axe has over the Joe Switch Axe is that it amps faster. This means you will get an extra rotation of file explosions against ATKT with the Ice Switch Axe, which does put it a little bit ahead. So let's cover the Ice Switch Axe Affinity Booster build first. We have the amp state active on the build cards shown because it actually makes a meaningful difference on elemental file switch axes. Similar to the Stream SNS, this uses peak performance and agitator. has 99% affinity when it's under affinity booster. Similar to the Stream SNS, again, the non-affinity booster version uses weakness exploit instead of peak performance. Now, I'm not just saying this because I'm a Switch Axe main, but in our opinion, Switch Axe is the best mounting weapon you can have in your party. The reason being is that while all 3 weapons we have listed here can all mount in 2 hits for the first mount, Switch Axe has the highest DPS by far out of them. Now, Switch Axe, while amped, has a unique mechanic you may not know about. So as you most likely know if you've ever played Switch Axe, when you swing through a monster with an amped sword, you get an explosion. What you may not know is that if you swing through a teammate, a corpse of a monster, or even a bitterbug or palico, you get an extra explosion. This means when you are all hugging up on KT's horns to get DPS out during CC, it is realistic for you to get up to 2 extra explosions per swing swinging through your 2 other DPS teammates. Unfortunately, you can't get 3 extra explosions because if you manage to hit a CC hunter on your team, you're going to be messing up their CC chain by flinching them. But with these 2 extra explosions per swing, the DPS output of the Switch Axe almost equals dual blades. Ice Dual Blades are the absolute queen of DPS against Area 4 KT, and we will be covering that build in just a moment. This is why you see the majority of P1 ATKT speedruns historically have run Switch Axe as their mounting weapon. Now, there is a polished version of this build you can use instead that has slightly higher EFR. It has 10 more true roll, which translates to 19.91 more EFR when under an affinity booster. However, you can't use this build if you're going to be the mounter. The issue with protective polish builds is they work very good for DPS slots because you can basically polish right before KT falls down from the mounts. But as the mounter, you do not have that luxury. Time taken to polish is time you could have spent attacking instead, which leads you to losing more damage than the slight EFR gain would have gained you. And of course there is a Devil Joe Switch Axe variant, but we will be covering that in a second. It's the same build as the template Devil Joe weapon build we'll be covering in the DPS section. Speaking of, let's cover that. So again, the queen of Area 4 DPS is still the dual blades. If you put the dual blades in triple S tier, then the Ice Switch Axe is potentially in double S tier, and pretty much everything else is A to D tier. The DPS difference is just that big for Ice dual blades against ATKT.
Did someone say max deeps?
Dual Blade's Demon Dance already has one of the highest DPSs against most monsters in the game. In fact, depending on the matchup and the hit zone values of the monster in question, it was the highest DPS move in the game. Aside from Clusters, Glutton, and Bow, but those 3 don't count. Combine that with the fact that ATKT has extremely high Severa hit zone values as well as extremely high Elemental hit zone values, and you have a recipe for a shit ton of damage. So the best Dual Blades against ATKT are the Kiara Dagger's Ice. This affinity booster build, while under affinity booster, will have 100% affinity with 532.22 EFR and 41.01 effective elements. Compared to the old KT Ice Dual Blades, these basically have a shit ton more EFR in exchange for a little bit less effective elements. But because the ratio of raw to elemental damage against ATKT's head is roughly 70-30, this does push it ahead. Now that the CC chain is mount KO para KO, you cannot stay in demon mode the entire time unless you have stamina cap up now. And Protective Polish lets us squeeze in some more damage skills. Just make sure to sharpen right before the mount finishes. Heat Guard is a side effect skill, but does stop you from taking damage from the lava in Area 3. Neato. We also have the non-affinity booster version. This one uses Master's Touch instead. Unfortunately, you lose stamina cap up and a buttload of EFR, but you don't have to rely on an affinity booster. Good if you're not confident in your team and you want to be able to freestyle better. Now, if you haven't gotten lucky enough yet to get the new Kiara Ice Daggers, here are the updated builds for the old KT Ice Dual Blades. Compared to the build from our original KT Meta Builds video, this build basically gains 3 attack boosts. Neato. The non-affinity booster version of the build gains 10% affinity through 2 crit eye. Very neato. All memes aside, these are still going to be the 2 highest damage options you have if you do not have the Kiara Ice Dual Blades. If you do not have either of these, then your best bet is to use the Freeze Chains. Just use the original Freeze Chains build we have from our original KT Meta video.
While dual blades are the absolute most optimal DPS weapon choice, we know not everyone will want to run them. Pretty much any high damage set will work as long as you run Bombardier 3. We can't stress enough how important that bomb damage is for a viable P1. Here is a Bombardier template you can run with Joe weapons. For most weapons, the Joe variant will deal the most damage due to high raw and bonus dragon damage. KT's horns have a 35 dragon hit zone value, leading to that damage being pretty significant. This affinity booster set hits 50% affinity without booster. With peak and affinity booster active, it hits 580.27 EFR and 20.25 EFE.
Very nice.
Health augment is nice due to the peak in the build, although you can change it to a second damage if you trust your CC. If you don't want to run affinity booster, here's the alternative. At 526.44 EFR, it's quite a bit less damage, but you aren't reliant on affinity booster, so it's better when you have to freestyle.
And yes, these are the builds you will run for the Joe Switch Axe if you do not have the Stream Switch Axe. Alright, finally let's talk about my favorite CC bow. Now because shot type damage is not a weak point against ATKT, bows can't use weakness exploit against her. This means we aren't going to talk about non-affinity booster versions because they're the same, the affinity doesn't get high enough. So first up we have the Kya Arrow Stream. So CC bow is quite a bit different than how it used to look for old KT. The only CC related skills we carry now are paralysis functionality through a para coating deco, as well as slugger 3 and stamina cap up. That means we no longer run sleep attack 3 or paralysis attack 3. The reason for this is because the second sleep or para is no longer a realistic thing to achieve. And for the first sleep or para, the difference it makes in terms of shots taken to para or sleep is so insignificant it's not worth investing into. Now 2 KOs are still realistic to get and are in fact needed if you want to consistently P1, so we still run slugger. And stamina cap up is still needed because the CC chain still demands it. The new chain is sleep, enrage, roar, then mount, KO, para, KO. Realistically, the only time during the mount KO para KO you get to stop shooting is when you have to put on para coating. And level 3 coconuts deal a lot more KO damage than level 1 coconuts, so you definitely want to have as much stamina as possible to try to get that second KO the chain. Other than these 3 skills, we no longer need any other CC related skills, so we just stack as much damage as we possibly can. Crit elements, affinity, power shots as well as normal shots up, bow charge plus, etc, etc, etc. This ability to not only KO para KO chain but also deal decent damage is the reason why bow is really the only viable CC option now. Heavy bowgun can still work, but it puts a lot more pressure on your teammates to both deal damage and also help you get that second KO. You just can't fire stickies fast enough in order to be able to get a KO para KO effectively as heavy bowgun. Bow admittedly can't do it solo still as well, but it does need less help for that. Now if you do not have the Kya Stream bow, we do have a version that uses the Legiana bow instead. Still has all the mandatory skills in there and can CC just fine, just deals a little bit less damage than the Kya bow does. Now there are higher damage versions of these that use Constitution 1 and require you to eat feline black belts. But personally I am not a big fan of these builds because I always eat for feline slugger. Feline Slugger is only a 5% increase to your KO output, but it does seem to make a pretty meaningful difference against ATKT. I will have to look into how the combo differentiates and how the KO values look when you're using Slugger versus not using Slugger, but until I've had a chance to investigate it further, I don't really feel comfortable recommending these builds to anyone because it's already challenging getting the KO para KO to come in Area 4. If the Constitution 1 builds do end up being worth using, then we'll be sure to make a video on that in the future. And that about does it, guys. A huge thank you to both Naiwa and Zan over at our Discord server. Both of them have done a lot of number crunching on ATKT and builds related to her, and exchanging notes with them has made this entire video much more possible. And a thank you also to Awent over at our Discord server, our resident Dual Blades and SNS math cruncher. Without the numbers he provided, I would not have been able to crunch the relative combo damage of the Joe vs Stream SNS. And of course, as always, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video and it helped you P1 ATKT, be sure to leave a like.
Let us know what you like to do when you do ATKT. If you're looking for somebody to hunt with, you can check out our Discord server, the Mathalos Nest, where we have plenty of people looking to take on ATKT. You can follow us on Twitter, where we post updates to videos and other things that interest us. You can also check me out on Twitch, where I stream Monster Hunter and other games almost every day. Shout out to Honey at Honey Hunter's World for providing the tools we use to make sets. And a huge thank you to our patrons, Foray, Exponage, Haika, Milky Powder, Yoshi Cho, John Cowan, Lithoboli, Robin, Bram, Lightweight, Skylar Yang, Broken Leah, Lupin, Mongus, Zinth, Lord Sidene, Jamie, and everyone else on Patreon who's been supporting us. We did start the new Patreon poll for which meta weapon to cover next, and so far it looks like the new Charge Blades are taking the lead. We'll also have some new CC chain combos coming out for ATKT, so be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when those go live. If you made it this far, thank you. Happy hunting, hunters. See you in the next one.
Bye.